Hey everyone, welcome to a special episode of the Filmographers Podcast. Now, we are still going to be having our regularly scheduled episode, which will be covering And Everything is Going Fine, the Spalding Gray documentary. But before that, Keir and I are going to be listing our top 5 favorite Soderbergh movies from the first half of his career. So that's covering from Sex Lies and Videotape all the way to Che Parts 1 and Parts 2. Now, if you're listening, you'll notice there's a little bit of a divide between these episodes because we actually recorded the Spalding Gray episode first. And if you're watching, you'll definitely notice a difference because Keir and I are wearing different clothing. So I am Michael Moreci.
And I'm Keir Graff. And welcome to a very special episode of the Filmographers Podcast. We're doing so many very special episodes lately. This is becoming a very special part of the season.
It's gonna morph into after school special territories, I hope one day. Like, Steven, don't make that movie. Steven, don't make that.
Lessons we will all learn. Looking forward to learning. Before we get going and share our top 5 favorites, I did want to share a couple pieces of listener mail, Mike, because we love it when people write in to us. We love it. Comments, any kind of feedback. We just love hearing from you guys and what you're thinking. As some of you regular listeners and viewers know, we do occasional episodes where we go to the movies, where we try to have a hot take within 24 hours of the release of a major movie. And we recently did Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis, which of course is a much talked about event. It's still being talked about as we record this. I suspect it will be talked about all the way until it disappears from the theaters. But we got a couple of...
Which might be minutes from now.
Minutes from now. It's not going to be there long. Go see it quickly if you're curious. Anyway, we had a lot of fun recording that reaction episode, and we got a couple of emails I just thought I would share. Scott, longtime listener, wrote in to say, I agreed with every word you said regarding Megalopolis. Thank you, Scott. It's so good to know we're all in sync on this. And Daniel wrote in to say, loved this episode. I actually managed to see Mega while on the road. Well, I think I liked it a little more than you both. I agree that it is a mess. Like, I don't even know what it's about. I don't understand or care about Caesar's story. I am hugely disappointed by the trajectory of the eye surgery subplot. I basically have no memory of what happened at the end. Also, why is Megalopolis any good? And yeah, what the fuck is Megalon? The only characters with a bit of spark were Wow and the Shia LaBeouf guy. One thing you brought up that was in my head the second I left the theater, there's nothing Coppola likes better than recutting his old movies. At this point, he's recut 7 of his movies. I think we are definitely getting a much longer version at some point. That will probably help in coherence, but I can't say I'm excited. Excellent feedback. We appreciate it. I agree completely on a recut of Megalopolis would help in coherence. I don't want to watch it. I probably will. One thing that shocked me about that, Mike, was that, as bad as that movie is, the one good thing about it is it's not terribly long. It's just over 2 hours. I'm kind of shocked that Coppola managed to keep it from being a 3.5 or 4 hour movie.
Yeah, that surprised me as well. And I wonder if there was, he partnered with Lionsgate, after he fronted his own money, he partnered with Lionsgate as a distributor. And I wonder if there was pressure from Lionsgate. I mean, who knows what their deal was and if he just gave him the cut that he gave him. But there could have been that pressure to, knowing what a gamble this movie would be theatrically, that they wanted to get it into as many theaters during a single day as possible. The longer the movie, the less slots that you have. So
Absolutely.
A 3-hour movie, 2-hour movie might play 5 times a day. A 3-hour movie play 4 times during a day. So that's one less showing, less money.
Yeah.
You probably have a small window. It's not going to last that long. And we're not trying to be rude, but it's not going to last that long in theater. So you got to squeeze as much as you can to fulfill, once the theater signs a contract that they're going to play it for X amount of weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is. You want to maximize that contract with as many showings as possible.
Well, I'll be curious to see what the future holds regarding a director's version. I'm sure it's all queued up and ready to drop.
Yeah, I'd like to see like Ridley Scott start recutting Francis Ford Coppola movies and Francis Ford Coppola start recutting Ridley Scott movies and making longer versions of each other's films. I think would be an interesting like thought experiment. But I'm glad that they brought that up because that is interesting because they like Scott, Coppola is a guy who recuts a lot of his movies. And speaking of listener feedback, if you like what we do, you're watching us on YouTube, please subscribe, like the video, comment on, what you thought of Megalopolis in our previous video, talk about your favorite Soderberghs as we're about to get into ours. If you're listening on the podcast, subscribe on your platform of choice, leave us a rating, review, etc. It does tremendous help, and we really appreciate it. And if you write into us at the filmographers podcast@gmail.com. We will read your feedback on the air at some point.
Absolutely. Yeah, please get in touch. And now on with our rankings.
On with the rankings. Yeah, Keir, do you want to start us off or should I go with number 4? Because we're going to go 5 and up, correct?
Yeah, sure. I can start. And I have to preface this as I always do by saying that like making lists of any kind gives me like great anxiety. I don't know. I don't know why I find it so difficult. Partly it's like I don't know. It's a fun exercise, but it also makes me very anxious because it's like, I started by, so we have like it's like the first 18 Soderbergh movies were kind of eligible. And I started by just kind of dividing them into columns that I titled great, good, and okay. Okay includes maybe a couple that are a little worse than okay, but generally speaking, that seemed like reasonable groupings. And honestly, you know, I had more movies in the first category. I think Soderbergh is a great filmmaker. That was by far the longest list, but of course that made my challenge in winnowing it down to 5 all the more difficult. And so I want to just kind of preface my list by saying, like, I don't necessarily think these are Soderbergh's best films, and best is a weird, arguable, right? It's a criteria you can argue, like, what is the best of anything, but these are my best. And this is during the process of doing this season, these are the movies that I reacted to most strongly, the films that I loved watching the most, and I felt most transported by. And if I had to kind of at the end of the season, if we make like what we think is our kind of canonical list of Soderbergh great films, this may well change, but these are the films that I kind of engaged with the most. And sometimes it was because it was a little more of a discovery for me. Or maybe it was a movie that I haven't seen many, many times, like Ocean's 11. So with that said, I will read. I will begin. So my 5th on my list of 5 is Bubble, a film that we both, I think, felt like kind of a discovery for us. One that we thought was me, oh, that's going to be a weird arty Soderbergh film, probably not going to be that great. And I found it so compelling. I was transported when I watched that movie. I watched it multiple times. I was sucked in every time. I think it's an undiscovered gem. It should be a cult classic. Hopefully someday it will be.
Yeah, I agree with you. And as a matter of fact, I can just roll into this because number 5 for me is The Limey. No, just kidding. It's Bubble. Number 5.
Wow.
Number 5 is Bubble, and it's the same thing. Like I was transported. I feel like I've said this before. It's for Ebert, his Gates of Heaven. This is our Gates of Heaven. This movie that we're going to talk about forever and champion because people need to see it. I want people to see it. It was released so strangely. It was ahead of its time. We know now, but it just didn't get a fair shake in its release. With the theatrical was weird, streaming wasn't there, direct to video was, they were selling it in movie theaters, like a place that was they're trying to rely on their competitors to sell the competition. Like it was just such a strange botched attempt. And granted, it is a little bit of an off the beaten path. There's no professional actors, no stars, so like even with the best circumstances, it probably wouldn't have been a breakout hit, but it surely would have been seen more than it did and wouldn't have been so quickly forgotten. I love that it doesn't, fetishize lower middle class people, which is something that, is a personal response that I always respond to personally. I think it's just so it just draws you in. It's a hypnotizing movie. It's entertaining nonetheless. It's surprising. It's well done. I love the people in it. I love the characters. I'm so glad that I discovered this. I didn't discover this movie personally, but I'm so glad that I myself discovered a movie that I hadn't seen before, and like you, was apprehensive about what the experience would be. But I fell head over heels for Bubble, and I'm going to keep talking about it for as much as anyone would listen. So that's my number 5.
Absolutely. Yeah. And talking about that release strategy, I mean, can you imagine even a movie you really love? Can you imagine like walking out and buying a DVD from the concession stand on your way out? No, it's just not going to happen that way. It's really unfortunate. Like a lot of the ways I mean, they were experimenting and, as you say, maybe a little ahead of their time. It's great that they tried this stuff, but it definitely didn't help the movie find its audience.
No, and if anybody remembers that, like I would love to hear from anybody who remembers, maybe didn't buy the DVD at the time, but remember seeing it or worked in a movie theater at the time. I've worked in movie theaters. I had 2 stints in my life. It's one of the best jobs of my life. But if anybody has any recollection of that experience, like how it was displayed, what it was like we said, the filmographers podcast at gmail.com. Send us a line. I'm fascinated. I'm truly, truly fascinated by this. So if you have any experience with us, please let us know what it was like for you.
Absolutely.
All
Okay,
right.
so
Keir.
number 4. So this is a little bit of a cheat because we and you already know where I'm going here. We treated these as one movie. It's actually 2 movies, but they're released as one and generally thought of as parts 1 and 2. So I'm picking for number 4, Che, parts 1 and 2.
Wow, interesting.
Which is another, I want to say kind of a deep cut, but again, a Soderbergh film that I hadn't watched and that I was, it had been on my radar for years and years. And for a long time, it was available for free on Netflix. And I still didn't watch it because I was like, oh my gosh, it's going to be like 4 hours of, Soderbergh's, pseudo documentary about, the Cuban revolutionary or the Argentinian revolutionary who fought in Cuba. And I just, I put it off and put it off. And then when I sat down to watch it for the podcast, didn't want to get up, didn't want to move. I feel like it was one of those things where I just was sucked in. I didn't hit pause. I watched both parts with equal focus and amazement. Both really, really good movies. I think we disagreed slightly on which one we preferred. I think I liked part 2 a little better than you. But I think it's a masterful filmmaking achievement. As we talked about in previous episodes, it was such an intense experience that it almost broke Soderbergh and maybe eventually led to his brief retirement from filmmaking. It was clearly kind of a traumatic thing, but it was a big swing that I think really paid off. And yet again, a movie that didn't really find its audience, isn't well remembered. I mean, however, there is a Criterion edition of it. It's well regarded enough, and that's well worth acquiring because the extras are fascinating. There's some really good stuff there. It's a movie that I've continued to think about since we've watched it. I want to go back and rewatch it again as soon as I have time. I actually want to do a lot more reading based on that because I think it's so interesting to consider the interplay between the real story and the way it's presented by Soderbergh. It's presented very faithfully, but of course there are artistic decisions to be made. I just think it's a terrific movie. And again, a movie that is in my top 5 based on my viewing experience.
Wow. Yeah, that's I loved it. I loved Che. I don't want to spoil anything of my list ahead, but I can say that you're right about my thoughts about part 2, and it's the reason why it falls into the honorable mention category for me. I didn't love part 2 as much as I love part 1. I really did love part 1, but I am fascinated by the movie. I love the performance. I love the look and feel. It just wasn't quite there. Very close, very close. There was internal arguments to be had. Myself.
Yeah. And this was, I will say that like the kind of 4th and 5th slots, I mean, I sort of knew Bubble was going on my list, but like the 4th and 5th slots were the toughest for me because there were just several other movies that were just right in there and really, they felt like they deserved to be on the list. But at some point you have to even if you find list making as difficult as I do, at some point you just have to kind of go with a gut feeling. And yeah, there were a couple of really great films that didn't make it into the top five, obviously.
Yeah, that's what makes it tough. That's what makes it worthy of discussion too. Like everyone's going to have their own five that, I have one I think might be a shocker that's not on my list. And I wonder if it's on yours, but um, I'll go with my four number right now. And I wonder if it's on your list. Don't tell me, but my number four is Aaron Brockovich. Um, a movie that at the time it's so strange. So this was the year of Soderbergh was Brockovich and Traffic in 2000, and he
Yeah.
battled himself for the Oscars. And at the time, I'm pretty confident. I'm very confident. I don't remember specifically, but I'm pretty certain that at the time I would have picked Traffic as the better Soderbergh. And a matter of fact, the Academy agreed.
Yeah.
Um, Watching it now, not only because I feel like Traffic has aged a little bit poorly because of the war on drugs, like we've said in our episodes, become a little quaint.
Yeah.
But the Aaron Brockovich story is just such a cool story. Like it's such a underdog story, which is something that we've discussed. Soderbergh has done time and time again. It's cool to see Light Bubble, a working class story. It's cool to see like the underdog take on the big corporation, the evil corporation, which wasn't so much of a thing as it is now in 2000 of like
Mhm.
seeing corporations literally poisoning us. Um, Julia Roberts is fantastic in this movie. Albert Finney is fantastic in this movie. Those are two, arguably maybe two of will forever go to top tier Hall of Fame Soderbergh performances. I would say both of those are in it.
Yeah.
Great performances. It's so well made. This cool movie. And Soderbergh does this often. That he makes the movies that don't get made anymore. It's this sort of Norma Ray single person fighting the system. I love that kind of movie. I'll always love that kind of movie. Aaron Brockovich nails it in every way, and that's why it is my number four.
I love that. I absolutely love that defense. And if viewers and listeners haven't picked up on this yet, we have not discussed or shared these lists with each other. So this is a really fun surprise for us to find out what the other guy has picked. And especially so because my number three pick is Aaron Brockovich.
Ah,
It's weird how in sync we are here. I kind of looked at it for a while and I was kind of like, am I really going to put Aaron Brockovich on my top five? Am I really going to put it at number three? And yes, I am. It's like absolutely it succeeds to me on just every level. It is a wonderful Hollywood movie that is funny, entertaining, perfectly paced. It is also, as you say, a film that like has a working class hero, which we need more of. The performances are top notch. Could not agree more. And then again, the timeliness of it. I mean, ProPublica has been doing a lot of reporting recently about how a whistleblower at 3M was silenced for trying to speak out about forever chemicals. This stuff is ongoing. These big corporations have been trying to like hide the poisons that are going into our air, water, and soil for decades. And so that movie to me remains timeless for that fact. Is it a little bit of a Hollywood ending? Yes. I said during our episode on it that the focus on the money that Aaron gets from the payout and all this stuff, like that, it wasn't the perfect note for me, but in almost every other way, this movie is perfect. It's just wildly entertaining, and it's a terrific commercial film that I wish we saw more like this, today. More just character-driven films that wouldn't cost you $1 million to, well, they cost millions of dollars, but they won't cost ridiculous millions of dollars to film because they're about performances more than cool CGI. So
yeah, like
I
he did what he did so many times. What we just talked about in Contagion, I think is a very similar trick that he pulls. Um, the case that Brockovich is battling against is complicated, like we said in the episode. Like it's there's lots of weird corporate malfeasance in and out. There's no courtroom drama. It's a courtroom drama where they're in a courtroom once, and it has nothing to do with actually the corporate case. It's Julia Roberts like small claim court or whatever it is at the beginning of the film. And that's it, and he does the same thing in Contagion, where he's like really, really driving home those character stuff while explaining and going through complicated science or Contagion or complicated legal stuff with Aaron Brockovich. So
Yeah.
like he pulls this wonderful trick that's not easy to do. And also, I forgot to mention, I love Aaron Eckhart in this movie. I just wish there's a reality out there somewhere where Aaron Eckhart's a big star. I
Yeah.
wish there were. I hope there is.
He's our manic pixie dream guy.
Yes, riding a motorcycle through our hearts.
Fascinating stuff. Well, what is your number three?
So my number three, and this is where things get challenging, like you said, like that. Well, they're all challenging, but my number three is The Limey. I absolutely, again, this is tough. These top three I are movies I truly love, and I love, 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 love The Limey. It's such a cool movie. I love what he does with time and space in this movie. I love Terrence Stamp's performance. It's such a cool, dreamy, just an absolute terrific, inventive noir coming in the shadow of Tarantino, where everything was, this dialogue heavy. How cool can everyone talk? How clever can everyone
Yeah.
be? And he plays it straight up in the sense of like no one's trying to no, none of the characters are trying too hard. Every character feels real. Peter Fonda's villain, it feels real. Terrence Stamp's sadness and regret, especially at the end of a relationship with his daughter. The way they splice in his old film, First Cow, I believe is what it was
Or
called.
cow.
Oh, yeah, yes, yeah, sorry. Is so inventive. There's just, it's a relentlessly creative movie that makes you really, I don't know, it's almost like a tapestry of feeling, almost of time and regret, and how Terrence Stamp's character is feeling throughout. You said it best in our episode. I love this, that like they say in film you can't capture someone thinking, but you definitely get through Stamp's performance and Soderbergh's directing him thinking and feeling and thinking about the past and how it affects him and how he feels about what's happened with his daughter and the chain of events that led from his estrangement and his criminal background all the way to her murder. And the reason for her murder is beautiful and tragic, and you see Stamp feel it the whole way. The playing with time in relation to that is so perfect. It's a masterpiece of a movie that I absolutely adore. The Limey.
Absolutely. It is very justifiably a top five, top three movie. And I'd like to throw out a little teaser here too, that pretty soon we'll be able to announce some particulars that the Filmographers podcast, we're going to be hosting an anniversary screening of The Limey in the Chicago area. So people stay tuned for more details.
Yeah, it's believe it or not, it's the 25th year anniversary of the Limey's release, which is time is soaring, because it was released in 1999, the year before the Brockovich traffic year. But yeah, we'll be screening it. We're gonna be live. We're gonna have an episode come from it, so it's gonna be a blast. And we'll have, like Keir said, we'll have details soon. So now we're down to it, Keir. This is where things get hot. Top two.
Top two. Well, for me, these choices were easier for me. My number two is this is anybody who's been following us, this is pretty unchanged. Out of Sight is a number two for me. It's funny because in some ways, watching Out of Sight for this season wasn't as transportive an experience because it's a movie I'm more familiar with. However, it absolutely holds up. I know it is a lot of people's favorite Soderbergh film, and justifiably so. It is just like the perfect blend. It's the best. Well, there have been some very good Elmore Leonard adaptations, but I think it's the best one because it's just captures the tone, it captures the humor, a little bit of the seriousness, some of the pathos, as we talked a lot about Steve Zahn's performance in that, and just how devastating his performance is, even in and amongst some of the humor of the rest of the movie. I just think it is a wonderful movie. It's sexy, it's funny, it's got some decent suspense. It looks great. It's sort of earlier Soderbergh, and he's definitely getting a lot of mileage out of the different kind of color palette, Miami versus Detroit. It's an eminently watchable movie. It's a movie you could watch every single year till the day you die and enjoy it every single year. And so in some ways, like watching it this year didn't just kind of transport me. I keep coming back to that word, but that was kind of my criteria for this list, because I wanted the movies where I forget I'm watching a movie. But this one, I'm a little more aware of it as a movie because of my familiarity with it. But nonetheless, every time I love it. It looks great. It's a ton of fun. It can't not be in my top two.
Yeah. No, I mean, I will just say I agree. I can't believe your number one is Kafka, though. That's going to be interesting.
Well, I prepared quite a defense. I hope you can allow me 30 minutes to get to my defense of Kafka.
Hey, let me get some coffee. Let me get comfortable here. Well, for reasons that are probably obvious, I'm not going to respond to Out of Sight just yet. I'll dive into my number two, which is a surprise to me because, like Bubble, I'd never seen this movie prior to the podcast. I've seen it many times now because I'm, kind of obsessed with it. My number two movie is The Good German. Wow. I can't get over how good this movie is. I can't get over how bold and how brave and how dark. This is a dark, deeply cynical movie, and it justifies every bit of its cynicism. I think, it was advertised, unfortunately, as this like homage to Casablanca, that it was, Soderbergh doing what he does, which we've talked about, and he's talked about, that he's a synthesist, that he takes stuff that he loves and he finds a way to do it new or do it his own way or whatever the case may be. I think he's being very modest, and we've talked about this before, and selling himself very, very short because he's far more than that. But I think that just fit into his wheelhouse of expectations, that this is what he does, is synthesizes and makes anew. And that's what people expected, audiences expected with The Good German. And it is not that movie at all. At all. I mean, it takes a wrecking ball to the idea of Casablanca, and I love Casablanca. This isn't to diminish Casablanca, but the romanticism of Casablanca is utterly demolished in this movie, where the tagline wasn't, but should have been. I mean, you wouldn't never make this movie. You wouldn't make this a tagline because it would only hurt the movie even more. But as many characters say throughout the movie, there's always something worse. And I know it is a dark movie. If you really watch it, I think you walk away and you're like, wow, this is dark. But if you really penetrate the movie, as we did, and go deeper and deeper, and you see the layers of just, like I said, cynicism, skepticism, darkness, it just goes deeper and deeper into this hole of really bleak stuff. But it's working off of this premise that, like, war is over, and ostensibly we are celebrating, and this is good. And yes, there was many good things to the ending of World War II and the victory of the Allies. But it goes into this like, but what's going to be worse now is that we are already setting the stage and preparing for the next war. And the US are recruiting Nazi scientists. We are going out of our way to establish these borders that benefit countries financially and in our power structures and things like that. And it's so accurate, and it's something you never see about, especially World War II is such a protected part of history, and for many good reasons. But to explore this through George Clooney's character, who's trying to find his former flame and discover that she's done terrible things, but it also pales in comparison to the reasons why she did these terrible things and the other terrible things around her, is such a bold and brave movie that every time I watched it, I just dug deeper and deeper. And I don't even think I've gotten to the bottom of everything that's going on in this movie. It's so many layers. It's so deep. It's so well done. It's one of Clooney's strongest performances. He's terrific. Kate Blanchett is terrific. Even Tobey Maguire, who I'm not as hard on as some people, but he's great in a limited and a surprising role for him. It is just remarkably well done, especially knowing that Soderbergh made it in the fashion that movies were made of that era in the late 40s, early 50s. He stuck to those camera lenses. He stuck to the shooting methods. It's a pure artistic victory that I just have become, like I said, obsessed with. I don't think I've reached the bottom of this movie, and I want to explore it more. It's just such a intelligent, brave, and dark movie, and I absolutely love it.
That is such a fantastic endorsement of a fantastic movie. That was the hardest one for me. I'm giving away something about my list here, but like probably won't really be a surprise. Did not make my list, but that was the hardest one. That was number 6 for me. I absolutely love that movie, and again, things just got really muddy around 4, 5, and 6 for me. But that movie was, again, another thing that felt like a discovery to me. It felt like, wow, there's a hell of a lot more here than I realized. Certainly your research on it helped bring it to life. I really encourage people to listen to our episode on The Good German, because it is a terrific movie. I mean, Casablanca was the movie they needed then. The Good German is the movie that we need now. And that we, when you're in the middle of a world war, you've got to look at things a little differently, probably. Right. But also, nobody could have really known the future. And I think they're terrific bookends, actually. And they're both great in their own right. Good German was mismarketed as, being closer to Casablanca than it was, but they are great bookends. I mean, it's fascinating to consider them in the context of each other. And I agree with basically everything you said. I think that Blanchett in particular is phenomenal performance. There are some really good performances, just even in the supporting roles, the smaller cast. Who's the actress who plays Blanchett's roommate? She was Calamity Jane in Deadwood.
Yeah, she's terrific. The lawyer, I forget his name as well. Both terrific.
Leland Orser, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. It's
Beau Bridges is great.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent movie. A little bit I'm a little surprised to see it at number 2, but I mean, it absolutely deserves top 5. And you're, again, everything you said about it is inspiring, and hopefully it inspires people to go out and watch it if they haven't seen it.
I hope so. Yeah, and it is a great pairing with Casablanca. I think there's definitely a double feature there that's very, very interesting to see. So it's definitely worth seeking out. It's hard to get. Both Keir and I, both our DVDs basically melted in the player, so God knows what. But you can get it digitally, so it does exist. It is accessible.
That's a screening we should try to host. Is The Good German, because it's so hard to find. Maybe we can talk to the Siskel or somebody.
I would love that. Oh my God, please let me do it. You know what? I'll tell you something after the show.
Fantastic.
Oh, filmographer secrets.
Okay, right, so now it's time for number 1. And again, I believe that both of our number 1s are going to be unchanged from early in the season, when I think we were sharing some of our favorite Soderberghs. My number 1 is, as it has been for quite a while, The Limey. I did spend some time questioning it this morning as I was coming into my office on the train, and working with the legal pad on my lap, and just thinking, like, am I just leaving it there because it's always been there? Am I being a little lazy? Should I consider bumping it off its perch? I don't know, maybe. But sometimes movies lodge in a particular place in our minds for good reason. Again, I try to evaluate all these movies with, criteria of quality and stuff. But as I said at the beginning, it's also just my emotional response to these films. It's my viewing experience. It's how lost I can get in them. When I'm reading a book, I spent decades as a book reviewer, and so it took me a long time to start reading novels as a reader again and not as a critic. And when I'm watching a movie, to me, whether it's a book or a movie, if I stop thinking about how it was constructed for a while and I'm just immersed in that thing itself, to me, that's the first sign of success, because it's not, I'm not seeing the seams or the rivets or the whatever. I'm just a victim of the filmmaker's artistry. And the limey produces in me just this kind of like, I don't know, like this state where I'm like, is like out of body state or something, where I just can watch it beginning to end without getting up, without getting distracted, without picking up my phone. I'm in. I think it's, for all the reasons you already shared and more, I just think it's an absolute masterpiece. And I know some people disagree. It's got a lot of defenders. It's also got some people who think it's maybe a little slight, or they don't like the time shifting or something like that. But I think that it succeeds on so many levels. Whether it's kind of like taking it as, I don't know that Terrence Stamp was ever really an icon, but he was kind of like a minor icon. He was a guy in the 60s who, had some notoriety, more famous in England than the US, but he was of a time and place. Bringing him in later in his career, using footage from an early film to show him aging, working that whole thing into the story. It's a triumph of filmmaking, but also of editing, because of the way it was put together after the fact, much to Lem Dobbs's chagrin. I like the visual effects, the way the memory scenes, like the footage is like flaring and stuff. It creates this kind of, I don't know, like this melancholic looking back at things. And the whole film is just infused with melancholy, but it also, at the right moments, gives you moments of satisfaction. Like there's an action movie moment of satisfaction where Terrence Stamp goes into the garage to confront somebody, gets beaten up, walks out. You think, well, he's done, the old man, dusts himself off, walks back in. Brilliant choice to shoot it wide. You just hear these gunshots, and then you see him coming back out. And it's like, that's a totally kick-ass action movie moment of satisfaction that gives you the kind of like, it keeps it from becoming too much a work of regret and melancholy. It's tonally varied enough, and there's humor. You've got, Luis Guzman is like a good foil who's kind of looking like, who is this guy, but is going along with him because they care about the same woman. I don't know. I'm kind of rambling, but it's a movie I love. I think clearly the amount of time I want to spend talking about it justifies its place as my number one. So my number one, The Limey, still there.
Yeah, that's easily a good number one choice. I can see on many lists. Although like you said, there are detractors, and for those who don't know, one of the detractors, as Keir mentioned, is Lem Dobbs, the man who wrote the movie. Which is, we've said it before, but if you're just tuning in now, one of the all-time great commentary tracks, where basically Lem Dobbs shits on the movie for the entirety of the commentary track, and Soderbergh takes it with utter grace. So definitely one of the most entertaining commentary tracks there is. It's legendary, not just for us, but just in commentary track lore in general. That's an all-timer. So
yeah,
check that out.
There's also a podcaster that I love, a podcast I listen to every episode, who just thinks the movie is just like a trifle, thinks Terrence Stamp is kind of unjustly lionized, just thinks the movie doesn't hold together. And it's so fascinating to me. I mean, that's the great thing about art, is just people can have totally different responses to it. But as I've often said, I'd rather engage with a work that has polarizing responses than a work of art where everybody's kind of like, it was okay. I mean, that's not a work of art. That's just content.
Yeah. And that's why, going back to the start, and that's why Megalopolis is such a interesting movie right now, is because, look, and I think we were fair to the movie. I think it's, no hiding that we didn't love it, But I do love that it gave us something to think about and it gave us something to talk about. It doesn't just lay there and say, watch me, in the background mindlessly and half paying attention like 90% of the shit that gets streamed on Netflix, like it actually at least elicits a response. And I am always grateful for the opportunity to be moved and made to think and form an opinion. And we don't have enough of that. And that's why Megalopolis, while not a movie we enjoy, I would say it's still an important movie to exist.
Yep, I didn't love it, but I love that it exists.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Speaking of movies I love that exist, my number one is, I'm sure everyone can guess already, is Out of Sight. Like you, Keir, this has been my number one from the beginning. I guess we can make the joke like, how many filmographers does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer would be none. We don't change for anybody. But like, I do, it is just my ultimate ideal of a movie. Like it has everything. It has, and I won't go on for long because you've covered it so wonderfully. We've covered it in our episode. We've talked about it since. It is just, it's funny, it's sexy, it's smart, it's cool, but never ostentatious with any of those things. It's so effortless as well. The performances are great. I still think in a world where this gets made 3 years later and Steven Soderbergh has more of his bona fide, Steve Zahn gets a Best Supporting Actor nomination. J-Lo might gets a Best Actress.
In an alternate universe, J-Lo is an amazing award-winning actor. Like had she just kind of continued on that path, interesting things could have happened. She was so good in it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a testament to her talent. I mean, it's a double-edged sword because it's a testament to her talent that she could have stayed on the path of just being a full-time performer, but she decided otherwise, and she can do so many different things, and because she's so talented. But there's a little bit of regret that she didn't stick around longer, just primarily in film, because she could have. There's a lot of great roles and a lot of great performances, I think, that we missed out on. But that said, Out of Sight is the perfect Elmore Leonard adaptation, like you said, who's one of my favorite writers. It's exactly everything that he does so well, of character and dialogue and setting. Like again, the way he shot Soderbergh shot Florida and the way he shoots Detroit. Don Cheadle is so great. Ving Rhames, like it's just brimming with character. It's so full of life. It's so perfectly plotted, so perfectly paced. I said on the podcast, there's not much else I can say about it. It is an absolute, for me, a perfect film. There's not a second that I would add, and there's not a second I would take away. I love that movie. It is my number one, and that'll never, I mean, unless he knocks something out of the park. In
Got
the
more
future,
movies coming.
He's got movies coming, but right now, it'd be very difficult to knock off Out of Sight from my top Soderbergh list.
I shared one movie that just was on the bubble for me and didn't make it. Do you want to share one movie that was close but didn't make your top five?
Yeah, well, I kind of mentioned it would just be Che. Che was the closest out of my six.
Interesting.
Out of my five. If there were a sixth, it would be Che.
Interesting. So we were very close on the films we listed. That's fascinating.
What was your sixth?
Because my six was Good German. So
Good German. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
we done top six.
Had we done top six, yeah, we would have the same six movies.
Same six movies, different order.
Yeah, yeah. But there are others, like you said, they're still in the good bucket. KAFKA is still a good movie. Schizopolis was close for me too.
Schizopolis that was not super far off, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what's surprising, here's the one surprise that I have, is on neither of our list, neither of our honorable mentions is Ocean's 11.
Ocean's 11 is definitely honorable mention for me. I wrestled with that because it's certainly, it's one of his great movies. It's delightful. It delivers so much of what Out of Sight delivers in terms of just filmmaking or film watching enjoyment. And maybe I didn't pick it just because it feels obvious. I think probably ultimately I didn't pick it because, again, my criteria, like it's the movie I had seen the most of any of these. There was the least surprise left for me, or the least revelation. It's terrific. It didn't miss by much. I probably put it right behind Good German, and then Schizopolis is close there. That's probably if I kept going with the list, it probably would have been Good German 6, Ocean's 11, and then Schizopolis, most likely. So
yeah, it'd probably be behind Schizopolis for me. I mean, look, I love it. It's a great, entertaining, crowd-pleasing movie, and there's nothing wrong with it at all. Like we've said before, if you ask 10 people, what is the movie that you associate with Steven Soderbergh, 9 say Ocean's 11. I'm very confident in that.
Yeah.
And
the other one says Out of Sight.
The other one says probably Out of Sight. Yeah, exactly. I mean, maybe there's a little bit more of a split there between those two movies, but so it's his most successful, launched a franchise, etc. Gave him the freedom to do lots of other interesting things. So I've no beef with it. It just doesn't hit me in the way, I guess, an artistic level, the way the top 5 and the honorable mentions like Che or Schizopolis do. It just doesn't, like the word you use, transport me in the way that those movies do. I still appreciate it. I'm still glad it exists, but it doesn't just quite elevate for me.
Well said. And maybe on that, we should, since this is part 1 of our 2-part episode today, maybe we should leave it at that. Is there anything else we need to add?
No, just stick around. Like I said, for our episode on And Everything Is Going Fine, the second Spalding Gray documentary that Steven Soderbergh has made. Keir and I discussed that. We discussed the making of and just Spalding Gray's legacy in this episode. I think it was we had a good discussion. It's weird talking about in the past tense because we already had it, but stick around for that. And like we said at the top of the show, share your list with us. Put it in the comments, send us an email. However, there's many ways to reach us. Social media. Just share your favorite Soderberghs. We want to know, and share your thoughts on our list if you'd like. If you think we're dead wrong, tell us. If Schizopolis is number 1, let us know. Happy to have that discussion. So, the filmographers@gmail.com. Leave us a review, leave us a rating, please. Put those comments in and tell your film-loving friends to check us out, check out our archive. Every movie we mention, we have a complete episode and in-depth discussion on, and you can find that in our archives. You can find it on our YouTube channel. They're all for free. They're all there. Check them out. Tell your friends to check them out and continue on this journey with us. We're past the halfway mark and cruising toward the end right now of Steven Soderbergh's filmography.
The finish line is going to keep moving, but that's okay.
Yeah. So thank you for watching and or listening. And we're gonna have a brief break and then stick around and we're gonna discuss And Everything Is Going Fine.
So,
you're English?
Yeah, that's right. Got called out to LA unexpected like. Do a job of work.
No rest for the wicked.
Yeah. You wrote me about my daughter.
Jenny was driving a little too fast, 2 o'clock in the morning. Could have happened to anybody.
No, not my girl. Who done it then?
Huh?
Snuffed her.
What are you talking about?
This bloke she was bunked up with.
Terry Valentine.
Your daughter, she had a fondness for dangerous men.
Can I help you?
Terry Valentine, do you know him?
Who are you? Hey, can I ask you a question? You have any friends, man?
The car behind us has been following us.
What is going on?
Jenny never told you about her dad. He's a career criminal. Well, what do you want me to do?
Handle this.
What's the deal? You and Terry Valentine at 20 paces?
Don't see why not.
Oh!
You're not from around here, are you?
Tell me. Tell me. Tell me. Tell me about Jenny.
Steven Soderbergh cast the monologuist Spalding Gray as the depressed alcoholic character Mr. Mungo in his 1993 film King of the Hill. They worked together again just a few years later when Soderbergh directed Gray's Anatomy, the filmed performance of Gray's story about his experience with an eye condition called macular pucker, released in 1996. On January 11th, 2004, Gray, struggling with his mental health following a serious car crash, committed suicide. In 2010, Soderbergh released his eulogy of Gray, a documentary called And Everything is Going Fine.
Welcome to a very special episode of The Filmographers. And you may wonder why it's a very special episode. I think partly because we're actually doing the episode on the dedication of Spalding Gray, but also it's special because you can see us. Here we are. We're doing a video episode. And that's also why, for the people who are really keeping track and keeping score at home, we technically should have been before Contagion by release date of Soderbergh's films. We're actually coming after because we wanted to work on this video and get it right. So that's why, double reasons why it's special. But this is The Filmographers, is the podcast where we study an entire director's career, one film at a time, mostly in order. I'm Michael Moreci.
And I'm Keir Graff. In our first season, we've been turning the spotlight on Steven Soderbergh, one of Hollywood's most fascinating and versatile directors. We discuss why each of his films succeeded or failed, always looking at them in the context of the Hollywood landscape at the time they were released.
As always, we want to know how working artists make a living doing what they love, because Keir and I are working artists doing what we love. We are both writers. Keir is a terrific best-selling author. I am a screenwriter and comics writer. So we're able to do this thing that we love, and we're fascinated how others do what they love, because it's always different for everybody else, even from director to director. And we hope that you will join us on this journey to watch, or in some cases rewatch, all of Steven Soderbergh's movies.
And we truly hope you're enjoying our season-long discussion of his films. And we hope you'll consider supporting the Filmographers podcast by leaving us a simple rating or review.
Yeah, every rating or review we receive helps us find new listeners, and that's critical. It's truly critical for our hopes to continue doing this show for many, many years, many seasons to come.
This is life in the time of the algorithm, and numbers drive success more than ever. Ratings and reviews help increase our visibility, and that is priceless to us. So please take just a quick moment. It could take as little as 30 seconds, take a few minutes if you want to write a little bit more, but go to your podcasting platform of choice, whether it's Apple, Spotify, Overcast, whatever, and just give us a little boost. It will help us tremendously.
And it'll also help us reach season 2, which I know that everyone, Keir included, Keir especially, I might even say, wants us to do our season on Uwe Boll. Right? Yes.
That's what I've been advocating for behind the scenes.
Yes. We're so close. We're so close.
This will be a shorter episode than usual because, unlike all the other movies we're covering this season, And Everything is Going Fine is not an original dramatic work. It's a documentary made entirely of existing footage with no voiceover and no talking heads.
Except for Grace.
As far as I'm aware, the only footage that was shot by Soderbergh consists of a few clips from Gray's Anatomy, but he does have a directing credit, and this is a podcast about directors, so we're doing it.
Yes, because we're the filmographers, and that's why. That's the justification. And also, fun fact, and Keir, you already know this, the original title for this podcast was The Completionist podcast. Thank God we didn't use that. The Completist.
We were going back and forth, but I think the Filmographers, I think we landed on the right title.
I agree. Sure. I agree. I couldn't even say completist. I still can't say it. God, thank God. Now, who knows? There's an alternative universe where the Completist podcast is like, skyrocketing. We've overcome. You must remember this.
Where we're number 1 on the Apple podcast rankings.
The Completist. Wow.
Damn it. Damn those guys.
Season 2. We're rebranding.
Now, if you haven't been following along this season, it might be helpful or interesting to go back and listen to episode number 6, Grey's Anatomy, just for some additional background and context. But if that is too much Spalding Gray for you, we completely understand. So anyway, we're going to get this started. Mike, can I please have your one-sentence summary of "And everything is going fine"?
Absolutely. To eulogize his friend, collaborator, and artistic doppelganger, Spalding Gray, Steven Soderbergh assembles a collage that allows Gray to tell his life story from beyond the grave in the format he loved best, the monologue.
Artistic doppelganger, eh? We're going to have to talk more about that.
Yeah, but we promised to talk about it less than Spalding Gray would have, because that would have been a lot. There would have been a lot of doppelganger talk. Macular doppelganger.
Yeah, I think it's probably for the best.
Maybe I should just tell you some of the facts as I remember them. I got very disillusioned with theater and the lack of adventure in it and experimentation. So I just did a story of my day as fast as I could speak it. Joyce, who was running it, asked me who wrote it. I sat down at this table in front of whoever came. It was word of mouth. Maybe there were 15 or 16 people there. And it was everything I could remember about sex and death till the age 14, which is the name of the monologue.
I was using myself to play myself. I was playing with myself.
And I was hooked. It went through me like a thump, like a whoo, like a you know what.
I kept a pretty tight diary for the facts, for the details.
My uncle said there are two kinds of people in Barrington Island, those who belong and those who don't.
I'm discursive. I'm associative.
I couldn't spell. I couldn't write. I could barely read. I didn't know that had nothing to do with writing.
My mother committed suicide. Shall I do it in the garage?
And the rumors were she died of cancer. There was no mention of suicide. Not dead, not killed herself. Again, that was avoidance language. And everything is going fine. Everything is going fine except for the squirrels, the gypsy moth, and a pig farmer named Rocky. Swimming to Cambodia. It was a radical, and I'd always been rooting for that breakthrough. It reached a larger audience, and I became more popular. I was told that I was manic depressive, was on Klonopin and lithium. I didn't think I could do another monologue. Being a dad is fantastic, it's very grounding, and it's got me out of myself because, believe me, their needs are bigger than yours. Forrest came to me very early on with questions about death. He wasn't even 4. Everyone knows they're going to die, but no one really believes it. I like telling the story of life better than I do living it. One of the ways to reincarnate is to tell your story. And I get enormous pleasure from that. It's like coming back.
For those who aren't familiar with Spalding Gray, I want to share a brief sketch of his life. And just a heads up, we're going to be talking about suicide quite a bit. So if you find that troubling, you might want to skip this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very important. And equally important, if you or a loved one is facing urgent thoughts of, self-harm, please call 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. People are there and they're waiting to help.
Spalding Gray, I described him in the previous episode as kind of the baby boomers David Sedaris. So hopefully that's a helpful description. He was an essayist and monologuist. He was a founding member of the experimental theater company, the Wooster Group in New York, which does not, it's not Wooster, Rhode Island, or wherever the hell that is. It was founded in Manhattan. And I believe when he died, he was living in a loft that was actually only a few blocks from their performance space. So I think he maintained some kind of connection to them throughout his whole career. He did, in addition to the monologues, he did some stage acting in the 1970s. He infamously appeared in a couple of porno movies kind of before his career really took off. It was the early 70s. It was The Hangover from the 60s. He tried some different stuff.
So now technically, not sorry to interrupt you, but now Soderbergh has worked with 2 adult film stars, with Sasha Grey and Spalding Gray. Whoa, wow, wait a second.
Holy crap, it all comes together. The circle has been squared.
Whoa.
That's a good catch, Mike. Yeah, see, clearly he's drawn to the adult performers.
With a very specific name.
Yeah. Gray will say he was no star of the can you call it the silver screen, the smutty screen? But he dabbled.
The smudgy screen.
Yeah, I advise don't look it up. It'll be like watching your dad have sex. Nobody needs to see that. But he then did segue into some more respectable screen acting, which he would do off and on throughout his career, although his main thing was stage performance. He was a WASP by birth and by upbringing, but culturally he was like a neurotic Jewish New Yorker. And he said that about himself. Jewish magazines and Jewish journalists noted the kind of, Jewish neurotic type humor in his material. So that was a thing. His signature monologues, which he delivered seated at a table with only a microphone, a notebook, and a glass of water, really influenced today's boom in spoken word performance and live storytelling. It's hard to picture This American Life or the Moth Radio Hour existing without him. He was doing that for quite a while, but then when he started performing his monologues in LA, he was discovered by filmmakers, and that's what allowed him to break out to a wider audience. His monologues were popular. Filmmakers would show up and they'd say, hey, let's put this on film. And that's what happened. So he kind of got on the map with Swimming to Cambodia, which was based on his experience acting in Roland Joffe's The Killing Fields. He's not a lead character, but he plays a role in that. And Jonathan Demme directed Swimming to Cambodia, and it's pretty freaking cool. It's like a decent performance movie. I remember seeing it in the theater and just loving that. Mike, did you ever see that one?
Unfortunately, no. I wanted to, and I meant to see it after we had watched Grey's Anatomy because and if you listen to the episode, I'm not a huge fan of that movie. And I'll be honest, I don't love And Everything Is Going Fine either. Like the spoken word performance is not, it doesn't connect with me. Like I don't really listen to The Moth or This American Life. I do recognize their value and I appreciate them, but it's just not as I have trouble holding my attention to it. But I always want to see Swimming to Cambodia, especially because I love Jonathan Demme. I've heard it's so great. I mean, he captured performance so well in, Stop Making Sense, obviously, famously. So it's always been something like culturally that I wanted to connect with in some way, or at least experience. But unfortunately, I just haven't as of yet. But I do hope to one day.
Now, Swimming to Cambodia is really important in the Soderbergh universe because that's where he discovered Gray and became interested in him. He saw it on VHS sometime after its 1987 release. And I think we used this quote in the last podcast, but it's worth repeating. He said, quote, "When I saw Swimming, I had the sensation that I assume a lot of people did, that my mind works like that too. The constant spinning and digressing and organizing seemed so genuine. I identified with the struggle to filter experience in such a way that it seems to make sense, which is an ongoing, sometimes futile process."
Well, what's interesting, sorry, let me add this really quick, because you pointed this out last episode about The Informant. Like you made this great point about in The Informant, there's the running, monologue that Matt Damon's carrying on that that are very hilarious and we love them. And I think there's one of the best parts of the movie where it's like, there's a lot of thought for a bear, that kind of stuff. But you point out like that's how our minds really work, are these digressions and tangents, and you're looking at one thing and then you all of a sudden start thinking another. So it's interesting to hear this quote from Soderbergh, and I'm glad that you found this because it really kind of highlights, that thing that he's attuned to and keen to, and like it's in, it brings him to Gray, and it's also like in his movies. It's literally, it's in The Informant. It's a big part of it.
Yeah, and in a Spalding Gray like digression here, I'm actually going to just throw this out there that I have actually been inspired in my own writing by our intense study of The Informant. I just enjoyed that internal monologue so much. I'd been planning to start a new novel this fall, and I recently went on a road trip that was a really kind of formative. That's not right. It was a fascinating experience. And I thought I would just kind of write about it just to, just to kind of like get the cobwebs out of my brain and just kind of do something different and kind of write about it without any real intention or outlining or any of the normal things I do. And the character that kind of started coming to me that was going to narrate this, I just found a lot of freedom in kind of riffing on his internal monologues and just kind of letting him go. And honestly, I'm not doing The Informant, but it really comes from that kind of, I'm trying to really access somebody's brain in a way that I haven't done as a writer, and just studying The Informant and laughing at it and enjoying it has kind of freed me up to do that. So, hey, thanks, Soderbergh. And I guess indirectly, thank you, Spalding Gray.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, we've talked about this a lot, thinking about, like we said at the top of the show, is like artists are always studying artists. And I think one of the greatest points of inspiration that we get is looking at art and looking at entertainment and stuff that we enjoy. And it just kind of has a tendency to seep into our conscious and then comes out, kind of comes in, and then it comes out in the way that's filtered through our own selves. And so it's cool that you're having that experience, because that's how creation sometimes works.
When you feel that intense point of connection with what somebody else is doing, it's like, sometimes we just have an envy and an urge to copy it. But, the best take on that, of course, is just when we understand a way to better express what we were already trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so film critic Amy Taubin would later observe, I thought this was really, really interesting quote, she said, "Well, Gray's body is the inverse of Mr. Soderbergh's. Gray's achronological storytelling has had an influence on Mr. Soderbergh's most formally ambitious films like The Limey and Che, which collapse memory and prophecy into an extremely active present." Now, debatable as to whether it's a direct line, but it's interesting that maybe there's some parallels there.
Yeah, I mean, I this is one of those things that I kind of struggle with, that as I put my artist hat on, writer, director, whatever, because I'm not saying that Amy Taubin is wrong. It's a really smart point, but it's like, these are the things that, like, I think you have this divide between like critic and artist, where I feel like, and I see this a lot in critical work, it's like they're trying to get inside the mind of the artist, but like artists never really consciously think about this. Like the patterns that we'll find in Soderbergh's work, I mean, he's been doing this long enough and talked about long enough that I'm sure like now he's gone back and has seen the patterns and can identify like, oh yeah, I do come to this a lot, and I do come to that a lot, and these habits exist. But like, I don't know about you, but like, I'm never conscious. Like, people have pointed out to me a few things in my work that like are reoccurring, but I never consciously am trying to do that. Like, it's just, it just comes out. It's like we were saying about that filter, like things affecting us, and it comes through our experience and the things that we love. And then we put it out into our own, synthesize it into our own work. But like, I just never have had that experience where like I'm super conscious of like, yeah, these are the things I enjoy to do, whether in content or form, and I'm aiming to do that. Like, I'm just never fully aware. It would be a stretch for I think Soderbergh to be working on Che and be like, yes, I'm gonna the chronological storytelling because of the Spalding Gray monologue. Yes, that's it. That's the ticket.
Yeah, I think I come down somewhere in the middle of that, which is that like I think a lot about form, and I think that Soderbergh thinks a lot about form, but I never think about like theme. And I like he's such a cerebral filmmaker that he's a guy who's written manifestos. He's a guy who does think about like, here's how I want to present this. So I think he thinks a lot about form. And I think I could see him putting a fair amount of thought into chronology. I agree. I don't think he's thinking like, well, Spalding did it, and now I'm going to do it. I think it's just sort of like when you encounter another artist who's getting at what you already have an artistic inclination to get at, it just kind of adds some general fuel and into the fire, and then you see what happens based on that. But yeah, I think it's interesting. Like, critics often pull out thematic stuff and say like, oh, this was really on their mind. I think that generally speaking, that stuff was really on our subconscious, because I never think about like, well, here's what I'm trying to say with this stuff.
Right. Yeah. It's so impossible. Like it's that depth of like observation that critics, and that's their job. And that's what makes critics, and critical looks at art so important, because they're recognizing this stuff and identifying it and bringing meaning to it. But I don't think that like artists are ever really as conscious of it, because I don't think you can be. I think it's like you're just thinking on two very different levels. It's like, it's like that famous David Lynch meme. I forget what he gets asked in an interview to speak about, like, tell us, basically he's like, tell us what this means, will you tell us what this thing in your movie means? And he just says no. But I think it's funny, but I don't think he can at some level, like not just because he's David Lynch and because he's so dreamlike, and like he has this very particular way of storytelling. I think he very much can. I think he knows what he's after, but like I also think there's that level of like divide between the way a critic would talk about something and the way an artist would talk about something.
Yes.
Especially their own work.
Yes, absolutely. And too, like, we know that Soderbergh loves to make movies. He loves the process of making movies. And there's probably two different stages to this, where he's making the thing and then he's in the editing room and he's shaping the thing, and he's looking back at the thing he was making, and he's applying his kind of critical sensibilities at that point too. And that's a lot of times where the decision to go achronological comes in.
Yeah, because I mean that is I don't remember. I think Che was shot how it was written, but as we noted, the line was not written out of order and it was edited out of order. So there's interesting wrinkles for sure.
Yeah. So after reading Gray's novel Impossible Vacation, which was published in 1992, and in that novel, Gray explored his mother's real life suicide when she was 52 years old. Soderbergh cast him in his third film, King of the Hill, as Mr. Mungo, a depressed man who eventually kills himself, which is just crazy.
Yeah. It's chilling. There's a lot of chilling elements here. I mean, it's eerie how Gray's life was haunted by his mother's suicide, and then he plays this character that in King of the Hill commits suicide. So there's a lot of very eerie and unfortunate overlaps going on here.
Yeah, and Soderbergh, that's why he thought he was right for the role, and Gray, that's why he was interested in the role, which is heavy stuff. Now, although in later years, Gray would involve audience members in his performances, like he developed this thing where after, I think it was at the end of his shows, he would bring audience members up on stage and interview them. His subject matter throughout his career was really almost always himself. I mean, we're talking, about a very, very self-involved, self-focused person. And even some of those interviews, which I've seen, you see little snippets of them in And Everything Is Going Fine. He'll bring somebody up on stage and he's kind of half interviewing them, but he's also talking about himself to the extent that sometimes they start interviewing him. So it's kind of an interesting move.
Yeah, it's like at the end of Everything's Going Fine, he says he's not like that. He says like, well, I'm not like Samuel Beckett, I'm not like navel gazing. And it's like,
yeah,
Spalding, buddy.
Yeah.
I hate to break this to you.
Yeah, if there was ever anybody who was in danger of disappearing up their own navel, it was him. It was him. Yeah. And that's just how some people experience life. I think we all know people like that who, have, who pore over the minutia of their own life kind of almost obsessively. And that's how, we all make sense of the world in different ways. And that was how he did it.
Yeah, definitely. He's very just the exploration wasn't very much internal. Some people, especially artists, the exploration is internal. Some it's external. Some it's a hybrid. But like his exploration into art and performance was very much an exploration of the self and his internal, like you said, minutia is a perfect word.
Yeah. Now, he had a very complicated personal life. He was unfaithful to Renee Shafransky, his first wife. While he was with her, he got Kathleen Russo pregnant. And of course, he documented the whole thing in a monologue called It's a Slippery Slope. It's really messy personal life. Won't get into that. It's his life, was his life. But in 2001, his life took a real turn for the worst. He was in a serious car crash in Ireland. It was just terrible. Like, he broke his hip, his skull was fractured. Like, he had to get a plate put in his skull. He struggled to walk, during his long, slow rehab. And he had already suffered from depression throughout his life at different times, but he became much more depressed and seemingly obsessed with suicide. He began to see the famed neurologist Oliver Sacks, and Oliver Sacks actually wrote about his experience with Spalding Gray in the New Yorker. I guess he didn't sign an NDA or whatever. And Gray told Sacks that he was thinking about the taking of his own life as a creative act. And he apparently became somewhat obsessed with that notion. And there began a series of, I don't know if they were suicide attempts or exploration of the idea of taking his own life. In October of 2002, his show Black Spot was completely canceled because he was having a mental health crisis, and he had to be talked off a bridge in New York by his wife and the police, and then he was checked into a mental hospital. In 2003, in September, he attempted suicide on the Staten Island ferry, but was talked out of it by a friend. He was seen again on the Staten Island ferry on January 9th of the following year, seemingly again in a state of crisis, unable to decide whether or not to disembark from the ferry. He was helped off it or removed or something by security guards. And then on January 11th, 2004, after disappearing from his Tribeca loft without his wallet or his medication, he was reported missing. So he disappeared the night before. The morning of the 11th, he was reported missing by his wife and family. And he disappeared. People assumed, I believe, because of his obsession with the bridge and the ferry, that he had taken his own life. And his body was discovered, the remains of his body were discovered on March 7th in New York's East River off Greenpoint, Brooklyn. And this is grim. He had to be identified by dental records.
Yeah, I mean, this is all grim stuff, like it's challenging. Look, this is a challenging film to talk about because it's so tied to all of these things. I mean, this is the reason Soderbergh put this together, the reason, unlike Grey's Anatomy, where it was actually, filmed specifically for this, it was just footage that was put together because it happens after his death. So it makes it challenging to talk about this movie a little bit, unfortunately.
Yeah, very hard to talk about just kind of film as film here. But Gray's life was his art and the subject of his art, and his art was his life. And despite his depression and mental illness, as I said, he seemed to consider taking his own life his final artistic act. I think it's probably impossible to talk about his art without taking his life into consideration. And so, rest in peace, Spalding Gray, and on with the show, I guess.
I like telling the story of life better than I do living it.
How does it
See,
do that?
I'm afraid of life. I don't know how you deal with this, but everything is chance. It's a miracle to me that I'm here, that the plane made it, that the sun came up. As soon as you don't have any form of God or meaning in your life, then you make it up as you go along. And certainly doing the monologue is making it up, getting control over it, giving it structure to what is normally chaos to me every day.
Mike, let's talk about this as a film and how it fits into Soderbergh's oeuvre.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. After Gray died, according to his widow, who you mentioned, Kathleen Russo, Soderbergh reached out to say he would like to tell the story of Gray's life. Now, according to Soderbergh, however, he only reached out after he had heard that Russo was interested in making a documentary about Gray. So, I mean, either way, Russo says she gave Soderbergh 120 hours of video, and then she gave him a free hand to do as he chose with that footage. I think he was obviously, because of his relationship, a trustworthy person to handle, Gray's legacy. He said that he knew all along that he wouldn't do the standard, biodoc thing of, having talking heads discussing Gray's life and work, but he did intend to use Gray's journal somehow. So either as like text on the screen or by having, other actors read them. He even had 25 years worth of journals, 25 years. That's a lot. Wow. Wow, that exists. Yeah, I hope there's and I don't know where these journals are now, but I hope there's like a library or something that has Gray's work, is preserving it and maybe even available to the public in some way, because that's a lot of work and it's important work. Gray's work, like I said, I'm not a big fan of that type of work, but this still are artistically valuable and worthwhile. So anyway, so he had these journals transcribed before he decided to keep it simple and only use Gray's voice to make the film of Gray's life, a monologue, because that's the most appropriate and fitting thing to do. Over 3 years or so, he whittled it all down to an hour and a half. So you would think this is more of an editing job than a directing job, but for once, Soderbergh didn't edit under his usual pseudonym, Mary Ann Bernard, and he didn't turn it over to longtime collaborative editor Stephen Moreci, who edited The Informant and Contagion. The editing was actually done by Susan Littenberg, who also edited Charlotte's Web, 13 Going on 30, Easy A, which starred Emma Stone, and Grey's Anatomy. So there is some kind of tie there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It makes sense. She was already part of the creative team. So I guess Soderbergh's role as director was, mainly going through the material and helping shape it before Littenberg did a final edit. I don't really know what their working relationship was, but I presume it was sort of hand in glove. Maybe it's basically two editors, but he just takes the directing credit, but is clearly more of an editing job as we would normally think of it than a directing job.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think above all that, it's a labor of love for Soderbergh. There's probably, no point getting too nitpicky, I guess, about the division of labor, but I don't know. It's interesting that he only has the directing credit in this one, which just goes to show that other people were involved, because we know Soderbergh that, like, we don't mean this in a bad way, but like, he'll take all the credit, but we know he's very hands-on, and he'll be the person to just do it and then come up with another name and attribute it to that person. But he did have true collaborative help, it seems, on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. So did you feel when you were watching it that you could see Soderbergh's hand in this? Like, does it feel to you that something more than a thoughtful selection of clips? Does it rise to the level of art?
I mean, I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to say about Soderbergh's hand in it. Like, I mean, what is interesting is that, and it's hard to describe, that there's like these interstitials where, and you'll know what I'm talking, anybody who's seen it know what I'm talking about, where Gray is being interviewed and you see the monitor that he's being interviewed on, as well as him being interviewed at times, and the camera's moving in, and you see like this different approach that felt kind of Soderbergh-ian, I guess you can say, because it's kind of like taking these interesting angles and stuff, and the monitor, the picture within the picture, the frame within the frame, which we know that Soderbergh loves. But like, I guess I got a sense of the Soderbergh touch in the way that, despite it being obviously so much content that he went through in both video and now, like we mentioned, the journals, despite being that, there was a clear narrative there. Like, I don't feel like, I don't know who would have done this. I'm not attributing any particular person to this, but there is a risk that it could have just been a Spalding Gray mixtape or a Spalding Gray greatest hits kind of thing. You do get a sense of the narrative of like Spalding Gray, the monologuist. You do get a sense of his power as a monologuist. You see that. You see how influential and important he is. And again, this is challenging to talk about, but you also see the decline. You also see the darkness of like him, and he's walking around in his cane. He's a little bit slower after the crash. You can tell he's the sharpness isn't quite there. He looks a little different. He looks a little not quite as healthy. So you also see the decline, and you also see and this is sad, but you also see in Gray himself that like, this is a guy who's kind of at the end. You can feel it in his behavior and his mannerisms. And I'm not saying, Soderbergh was after doing anything that's like performative for Gray and making you want to feel bad for him, or really applying any judgment to Gray at all. I think he's doing what Soderbergh does, is capturing a narrative and capturing a as Ebert would say, the blink of a lifetime. And I think Soderbergh does that really well at times, and I think he did it really well here.
Yeah. I think there is art in the assemblage, and that it more or less succeeds in what Soderbergh wants it to be.
Yeah.
But it's also not a project that, he took for his usual reason of artistic curiosity. He took it out of a sense of obligation, and that's not just me saying that. You mentioned in your one sentence summary that Gray was Soderbergh's artistic doppelganger, and digging around, I found this fascinating quote from him in the New York Times, which I believe deserves to be read at length. Quote, "What's so bizarre in all this was the central role suicide played in his life. It's right at the core of the work, and it's discussed in such a wide-ranging way. And maybe that's what frightened me when I heard about his accident. You didn't have to be a genius to know that Spalding's equilibrium was very precarious, and I was really scared that this would weaken his ability to sort things out in the way he always did, by working." End quote. Now, Soderbergh said that he shared Gray's need to, quote, "keep making art in order to get out of bed in the morning," end quote, and that he felt an irrational fear that Gray's problems would splash onto him. It made him so nervous, in fact, that he never made contact with Gray again after the accident. I'm going to pick up the quote again. "I was totally absent in a way that is inexcusable to me. And this entire movie is in part an act of contrition. The irony is that I spent the better part of 3 years immersed in something that I tried to avoid. But as Spalding would say, what are we to do with any of this except make a piece of art?"
Yeah, I mean that's tough stuff there, and it goes to what you pointed out, that he was thinking about taking his own life as a creative act, because he saw everything that he did. I think maybe not everything, but a lot of what he did, and that's kind of goes to navel gazing as art, is the exploration of itself through an artistic lens that he was able to then share and entertain others and entertain many others. But there is so many challenges in there, and I think Soderbergh points it out. We know that it's hard to immerse yourself in someone's life when they're like this, posthumously. It's hard to watch it now when Gray's been gone for a long time. I mean, I can't imagine trying to be in Gray's life. Not to say that you shouldn't, or that Soderbergh's justified or whatever, but it is challenging to be around someone like that, and I think it's at least bold of Soderbergh to admit that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, we often talk about Soderbergh's honesty, and I think that's a sterling example of just how honest he can be.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, through all this, we've kind of been dancing around the thumbs up, thumbs down. So, Mike, you've kind of alluded to this already. How much didn't you like it?
No, it's not a movie I didn't enjoy. It's just not, this movie is, up against the wall in a way, for lack of a better term, because it's not something that engages me, so that's a challenge. The Grey's Anatomy engaged me much more because like we said, there was the more of the Soderbergh fingerprint over it, because he's doing different things, and you get Gray telling a complete the macular pucker story, from beginning to end. So there is that narrative that's happening, I guess a conventional narrative. There is a narrative,
yeah,
and everything's going fine. It's just looser because of the circumstances in which it was made. I hesitate to give it a thumbs down, because like I said, I feel like I'm partial to what the presentation of it all. I think that it's a good and noble effort that Soderbergh made in terms of just making it out of cobbling together this footage and creating something whole out of it, and really tackling a difficult subject, because it's not just that suicide is a very difficult subject, obviously, but also capturing Gray at this time of his life, when he's very low. Like I said, the last bit of this movie, I don't remember, maybe 20 minutes, maybe even more, he's pretty low in this movie, and you feel it. And that is a challenging thing to put on film and release to people. It's bold to say, come and watch this guy as he declines into, as they say in Little Miss Sunshine, checking out early.
Yeah.
So how about you though? I mean, I think well, no.
Yeah, it's funny because I like you, I like Grey's Anatomy pretty well, like a lot more than I expected to. You know, I revisited that one thinking that Grey's material would seem, dated and that he would seem like this kind of dinosaur. But, well, I found his self-obsession somewhat tiring. I was engaged by this story and very engaged, like really engaged by Soderbergh's staging of it, which was to present it like a concert film without an audience. So, I thought it worked. I thought it was pretty good. This one, less good, or at least for me. I do think Soderbergh does an admirable job of, shaping Gray's life story through only performance and interviews. And I think that approach is 100% appropriate for someone as public as Gray. But I also found it just kind of exhausting. It's only 90 minutes. It felt longer. And I think part of that is because, it's not a single story crafted by Gray. It's his whole messy life. As you say, it's like there is a narrative, there is an arc, but it's not like a story he intended to tell as a story. And, I think the bigger challenge for me is just that it's just wall to wall Gray. And, he never stops talking. His voice was his creative tool, of course, but it felt like it needed some varied pacing or some slower parts, or, I found myself kind of just craving a break, like some silence, like a musical interlude or an intermission, just so I could take a break.
This is the pause. You can always pause it here.
Damn it, Mike. I'm a filmographer. I try to watch the film as, as it's intended to be watched.
Well, I mean, I agree. Fair enough. But full disclosure, despite being a 90-minute movie, this took me a couple viewings to get through. Like I couldn't get through it all at once. It's tough. I mean, and it's for the reasons that you mentioned. Like nobody can replicate the power of Gray's voice, and him talking about how he discovered that is really cool. Like when he's like, I feel like I have this ability to tell this story, and he does. He very much does. But I don't know, trying to tell a Gray story that he's not telling is, it's hard. It's hard. But that said, I admire your commitment to seeing it through, even though, you may be making yourself suffer unnecessarily just a little bit.
I will say, also full disclosure, my attention may have wandered a couple of times. And this is the first film that we've done this season that I haven't watched multiple times. Previously I've watched everything at least twice, most of them 3 times. Once was enough with this one. Bottom line, I think it's a noble project. It's conceived for the best reasons, and I think it succeeds about as well as it can. But this time, it was just too much Gray for me.
I met this American expatriate on the plane that was living in Paris, and he had friends down in Greece. He said, no problem at all. Look, you come with me, take a room in the hotel that I'm staying in, and then we'll go out to eat. We'll have some drinks. You go up to see the ruins first, and we'll meet, and we'll have drinks and eat. By then, I knew that this guy was a homosexual. He was gay, and he told me, he said, it's much better to be gay if you're traveling a lot. It's just much more convenient. You have more sexual activity. And oh, really? I said, yeah. He said, no, this is true. I got into bed, and I started feeling that kind of springtime feeling in the base of my spine, a little slight itch. I thought, I wonder why he didn't try to seduce me. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with him? And I thought, maybe I should go ask him. Yeah. So I got up, I got dressed, and I went out and I knocked on his door. He said, who is it? I said, Spalding. He said, come in. So I kind of went along the wall. I came in and I said, we've got to do something. He said, go take a shower. You can use my shower and we'll talk. So I came out of the shower dripping, and look, I figured it was safe. He was clean. He was nice. He was was better than one of those, you know, it's a private room. I figured I was going to be traveling in Greece. I might as well get initiated. and I thought it was better than one of those steamy New York City gay baths, and who would never know?
So I find it very interesting that And Everything Going Fine was deemed worthy of a Criterion edition, which it was. It's out of print, but the used copies go for like quite a bit on eBay.
Yeah, I almost bought this one because I'm trying to, assemble all the movies in the Soderbergh archive, but I couldn't quite pull the trigger when the cheap ones were going for $60. And yeah, it's free on YouTube, folks. Now, before we wrap up, I want to share a little bit of the response people had to the film at the time, which was pretty good, so maybe we're in the minority because it has a 91% critical rating and a 72% rating on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, I mean, that's good. I mean, I feel like we would fall into, if we're on a sliding scale, 100% being obviously an A, 70%, 72% being a C minus, I feel like is the modern grading.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, not too many things on Rotten Tomatoes really actually get an A by that metric, but yeah, I guess C minus.
Yeah, I feel like that's fair. But maybe, and this is the question I have for you, do you think critics were being maybe a little charitable given the conditions?
Yeah, I think that's definitely possible because it's hard to want to be the person who comes out and savages a film about a dead man. Some time had passed, since his death and the thing came up, but still, it is a eulogy. So that could have something to do with it. But for whatever reason, it clearly hit a lot of critics differently than it hit us. Ian Buckwalter of NPR said, Soderbergh imposes a shape until the film begins to feel less like puzzle pieces in search of their place and more like one seamless picture. With this collage of the artist's past work, he's created an entirely new final monologue for Gray. Dan Coyce, I don't know how to say his name, of the Washington Post wrote, a brilliantly conceived documentary with one with uncommon respect for and understanding of its subject's life and art. So brilliant. And A.O. Scott of the New York Times called it a tour de force of smart and sensitive editing. But not everybody liked it. There was one critic who was willing to buck the trend. Kyle Smith of the New York Post wrote, Spalding Gray's new film, And Everything Is Going Fine, is 89 minutes long. What a coincidence. That's exactly 89 more minutes of Spalding Gray than I can stand.
I mean, great line. I mean, I'm sorry. Like, funny's funny. It's a great line. It's a little rough to say about a dead man. Maybe he didn't know. I don't know. I mean, it's possible not to know, but it's a zinger. I'll give him credit.
I mean, it's the New York Post, so it's a coin toss whether he actually did the research to know if he was dead. But Mike, money feels almost beside the point here, but did it make any?
No, I mean, no. I mean, it was made for IFC Films, so I'm guessing it was planned for more of a TV streaming release. As best as I can tell, it had a 20-day theatrical release in 2 theaters. 2. That's not a typo. 2. With a worldwide gross of $22,000.
Wow. Well, I didn't love the movie, but that still makes me sad.
Yeah, I mean, it was screened at several film festivals, but according to, at least from IMDb, from what we can tell here, it didn't take home any awards. That's typical. If people don't know, like, festival screenings will screen a lot of movies. We were just talking about the Chicago International Film Festival that's coming up, and there's the stellar highlights that are like going to be what people are talking about and looking at, but then there's also like 60 more films that they're playing.
Yeah. Now, it's currently not streaming anywhere, and DVDs, as I said, are out of print. And also, as I said, you can watch it for free on YouTube. So, if we haven't talked you out of it, you can check it out. Watch a few minutes anyway, just so you get the flavor. You can watch the first 10 minutes and you'll know whether you want to keep going with it or not. Mike, any final thoughts on "And Everything Is Going Fine"?
Well, I want to say, I find it funny that you're like, if we haven't talked you out of it, I feel like we have to like redo our taglines, like where we say to watch or rewatch all Soderbergh's films. I feel like now it's like watch, rewatch, or avoid.
Oh
Which is
no.
not our intention. We're just being honest about it. But that aside, because I love what you said there, I just want to say to our listeners that, being a podcaster isn't all, out of sight and Ocean's 11. It'd be great if it were, but sometimes it's the underneath and everything is going fine. But we watch them all, every single one, sometimes, most of the time, multiple times. We can't all the time because this week, like you, Keir, I couldn't. One time was like, we're good. But we watch them all. We watch them all, and we watch them for you, for us too, but we watch them for you as well. So if you want to show our support and help us keep doing more deep dives into directors, filmographers, like we said before, please leave us a rating and review. 5 seconds, 2 minutes, whatever. It doesn't take long. Just go to your platform of choice. Go to your platform not of choice. Just go and like troll other platforms and like throw some things on there. Like, it really, really, really helps us. That visibility is huge, helps us rise in charts, helps us acquire new listeners, and it just means so much to us. And it's so little that we're asking. We're not kidding. It only takes a matter of moments to get this done. So please, if you can do that, that'd be awesome.
And if you want to be a super friend of the show and help us spread the word, tell a film loving friend about the show. Sometimes that word of mouth recommendation, one friend to another, is, makes a world of difference. Or share an episode of the show on social media. That it would be huge because, let's face it, we're not awesome at social media. We do our best, and we're not even sure where people are going these days. Twitter seems to be a ghost town. But if you post something where you're finding your film friends, we would really, really appreciate that. Give us a tag. It just would make all the difference in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, MySpace, I think, is where you go now. I think that's, or Friendster.
We'll welcome them all.
Yeah, I mean, technically, I think I still have a Friendster account. Anyway, thanks as always to our superstar producer, Kevin Lau, Gompson, who composed and played our theme music, and Cosmo Graff, who designed our logo.
Join us next week on the Filmographers Podcast. What will we discuss next week, Mike? We're filming
I believe Haywire.
Haywire.
We're all out of order, so nobody even listened to the end of our episodes at this point.
We're a little out of order because of this very special video episode, but I believe next week will be Haywire. Yeah.
Look, the bottom line is we'll be back with a Soderbergh movie. That much is guaranteed.
Guaranteed. We'll see you then, or we'll be in your earbuds or whatever next week.